G'day, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Military Mindset for Business podcast, where today I'm talking to a good friend and someone I find really fascinating with a great story to tell. It's Mark Skrzypiec from Vantage Point. Mark, how are you today?
I'm well, Pete. How are you?
Mate, I'm really good. Now, I've been really interested in chatting to you because one of the things that is really powerful in the military is supply chain. Now, for those out there that are not really familiar with the military, there's two broad pathways we can choose. You've got the gallant warfighters who are, riding their steeds of iron or, charging into battle with their bayonets. And then you've got people like me, the humble logisticians who are in the rear with the gear or, behind the warfighters, making sure that they are, sustained and have everything that they need for the fight. Now, you are an interesting position because you sort of cross over both of these sides. You're an infantry sergeant in the Army Reserves, but you're also a supply chain expert in the civilian world. So I'm really interested to have a chat about how you blended those two worlds and your experiences.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Pete, for having me on. And it's great to join you this morning. So, I suppose my story is I have a passion and have had a passion for supply chain ever since I started in a warehouse, putting myself through uni, and then started going through that process and went, hey, I really want to join the Army and, serve and then hopefully lead at some stage, and decided to, do the whole Kapuka thing and chose to be a gallant warfighter, as you say, but appreciate, all the logisticians and all the guys with the gear in the rear. Being fortunate enough to, as you say, blend both of those passions together. So thank you very much.
Perfect, mate. So can I just unpack a little bit about what the Army Reserve's like? And having never done it myself, how long have you been doing it for? Tell us a little bit about your training and what both the obligations and the commitments are to being a reservist in the infantry.
Sure. I'm actually coming, I think tomorrow is my 20th year since I've enlisted. So 20 years in the Army Reserve has been, it's a part-time job. It's an interesting part-time job. You are fortunate enough to step into it when you feel like it. And then sometimes people, step out when they don't feel like it, or their lives take a turn, for me, had a little bit of a pause while I was doing my Masters of Business and raising a family. So the benefit of the Army Reserve is gives you flexibility.
Yep. And what are some of the cool things you've been able to do in the reserve that you wouldn't have had those experiences at all, in the warehouse life?
Exercises, trips, more. I haven't done any trips overseas, but certainly a lot of my colleagues and mates have had opportunities to go and serve overseas. The mateship is, something that is really good and supportive, not only from the military sense, but also from a professional sense. You meet lots of other professionals, whether they're lawyers, whether they're doctors, whether they're other warehouse people, and you can share those experiences and also benefit professionally from those, those friendships. But also it's, being a lad, just going out there, patrolling as an infantry soldier, with your rifle, doing what an infantryman does. Only, we're not as proficient as, say, a full-timer, right? We got the same skill sets, but we don't have that same level of proficiency that, a full-time would go. And, that's because we only do it part-time.
Yeah. We're watching a TV show at home called Alone at the moment, and I am having some very little remote flashbacks to my very, very few times of doing proper bush. And I do have a confession to make, is that ever since I've left the Army, I have not been camping since. Not that I'm scarred by my experience, but I've got young boys now, so I got to get back out in the bush and start sleeping on the ground again. But
You've got to
mate,
get
it's
back into it, Pete. Got to get
mate,
back.
I got to get back into it. But I tell you what, I like what you said about there being a lad. Army's the best job I ever had. You know, like without doubt, it was my favorite job. But you know, as you know, all of us, it has a time and a place. And for me, entrepreneurship and business was ultimately my pathway. But again, to be a lad where you can hang out with mates, you know, some of the most amazing men and women that I've ever met in my life with a common purpose that are just cracking on and doing things together.
Yes,
Plus, you know, helicopters and guns and bombs and you know, explosives and you know, parachuting and all that kind of good stuff is just par for the course.
100%, 100%.
Mate, well, let's get into supply chain because I know enough to be dangerous and enough, but really that is not far off being incompetent, to be honest. So let's really what I want to understand and draw out from today is for someone who is looking either to improve their supply chain or to start a business that's got a heavy consideration supply chain, potentially like an e-com business or I just really want to unpack your expertise about what are some of the basic principles we should look for, and then go into some of the more complex components. So let's go back and talk about your journey from that warehouse into what is Vantage Point today. Can you share a little bit of that story?
Yeah, sure. I'd love to. Started in warehousing, just really at the ground floor. Built my career from the ground up, went into supervisory roles and management roles within warehousing and some large 3PL providers a long time ago. Then transitioned across to, probably an extension of warehousing, which is that inventory management piece. And then as I grew, I really wanted to expand sort of my horizons and not just be within a warehouse, and then took on other roles, be it in supply planning, demand planning, and then, leading logistics teams, and eventually running and being the head of supply chain for some large, international companies across sort of the Asia or Australia region.
Mm. My first experience in logistics on an operational perspective was so as a RAME officer, which is the Royal Australian Electrical and Mechanical Engineers, part of our platoon was called the Repair Parts Store, or the RPS. And because all of the fitters and turners and mechanics needed spare parts to fix stuff, now the RPS was an integral part of us being able to do our job properly. And particularly on operations in East Timor, where like literally getting that RPS, from, getting those parts to fix the stuff so that the infantry guys can do the job and have their armored vehicles and their weaponry when they needed it, became really, really, really important. If you don't have the kit to do the job, then you can't do the job with the full capability.
Yeah.
So what kind of stuff were you working with warehousing? Like big stuff, hard stuff, cold stuff? What were the actual products?
My career's been, really fortunate from, and it's been across industry sectors as well. So it's been, small parts, tiny little screws, all the way to fridges, freezers, dishwashers, and then, in some elements, moving boats around as well. So, I've been fortunate enough to have been involved in some industries such as fashion, light manufacturing, fast-moving consumer goods, appliances, healthcare as well has been a big part of, what I've been doing as part of Vantage Point as well. So,
what do you find some of those basic considerations are like between those products?
Yeah, I think you need to have an understanding of, what product you're moving, right? So, and really understanding what the customer needs, right? So back to the point that you raised about the repair store, right? And getting the parts right to the front to the infantry soldier is one of the key principles that I take into, speaking to a client is really understanding what their customer needs are. And a key principle that I take into supply chain is, a customer focus. So what does that customer need, right? Do they need the product in a hurry? Do they need it there potentially, not in a hurry, but they need it there more economically? And it's really understanding that, and then taking that understanding and then pulling it through the organization, right? Whether that's understanding what it needs from a freight movement perspective or a warehouse perspective. And, and then that can go through all the way to, the demand management as well as the supply management as well. So, and it's really taking that and reading it back to the client and going, well, this is how I understand your customer, and let's see what we can do to maximize value.
So in terms of demand management, again, knowing enough to be dangerous, there's this term called just-in-time supply chain. Can you just share what your experience of that is, and what it means, and is it applicable today?
Yeah, again, it's really understanding, the business, the parts that they're moving. Certainly just in time was bringing the goods to, the customer, or holding the minimum amount of stock required. Now I think my personal view, really post-COVID, is somewhat changed, in the sense that, given Australia's geographic location, the constraints that we've had with freight over the COVID period, it is potentially more value to an organization to hold more inventory and to have more of a buffer, rather than bringing inventory in, just in time to meet a demand. So again, probably back to my first point there, Pete, is really understanding what the customer's focus is and what the client is, really trying to achieve for their customer.
And again, inventory on the shelf is a severe drain on cash. But again, the reputational risks of not having that stuff when the customer needs it. Now, are you going to let your customer down and not be able to? Are they going to go shopping somewhere else if you don't have it? So again, I think going back to that point of yours, where understanding your client, understanding your product is really critical here. What about diversification in your supply chain? How important is that?
Yeah, certainly. A lot of the work that I did supporting clients over COVID, where they may have had a single source supplier, there was really a scramble to get, a wider footprint of suppliers to support their customers. And we saw with protective equipment, whether it was face shields, face masks, hand sanitizer, whatever it was, organizations were just trying to get the inventory from everywhere. Now, again, depending on the product that particular organization, is selling, some would, the approach may be to have multiple suppliers. But again, the point that I'm trying to make is, it depends what you're selling, right? So if it's, quite an agnostic product and you can get it from multiple sources, there's a great deal of benefit from being able to, diversify that supply chain. But then there is some other products that are being sold by organizations that's just not feasible. And again, that's where, organizations like mine could come in and really put other strategies around it. So, deeper inventory holdings, for example, or securing your supply chain in other ways, such as strengthening relationships with the manufacturer and shipping lines if it is coming from overseas. And again, back to that first sort of principle, it's around that customer, right? And inventory is a burden on cash, particularly if it's not moving and sitting on the shelf. And it really is for the organization's leadership to understand, what position that they want to play. Are they happy to maybe not service their customer because they're balancing cash? And that's something that I don't believe that there's ever a right or wrong answer. because inventory comes, inventory goes, the needs of a customer change. So there's all, you know, this continuous improvement and this continual look at, you know, what you're doing within the supply chain, you know, is particularly important, and something that I constantly do for clients, and testing the waters, and you know, doing a litmus test on, you know, where they are at sort of any given time.
It must be all, you know, again, the complex planning of this. There's a lot that goes into it, which is why we have supply chain professionals. And a quick example from my first experience out of the army was we started a little window lock business. And I literally I remember in the first sort of month, I had about 6 or 7 boxes of window locks that were sitting in the shed and not moving, probably worth about $800 or $900. And I was like, oh, so much money worth of locks there. But then the business exploded to the point that we were buying, you know, 20, 30 grand worth of window locks every week just to keep things going. And then we had some real risks because we were using a single supplier and we weren't really sure what was going on. So we tried to diversify. But then because there was such a demand for the time, because it was a legislation piece, all of a sudden now we're in a factory, you know, with hundreds of boxer locks worth, you know, tens of thousands of dollars at any moment sitting on the shelf. But if we didn't get that mix right, then the 30 or 40 staff we had, it's so many deeper complications into operations. Now, the biggest problem for me was when all the window locks were put onto the buildings of Sydney and the legislated needs were met, I got stuck with about bloody 300 boxes of locks. So my first little worry of having 3 or 4 boxes lying around in my shed, now I've got hundreds of these boxes and no one to buy them.
Yeah.
And I lugged them around for about 2.5 years until I could finally sell them for $1 a lock.
Yeah.
But but that was, you know, tens of thousands of dollars in a little business like ours, you know, doing probably, you know, $3 or $4 million of revenue a year at the time, tens of thousands of dollars of inventory just sitting there, which ultimately just went for nothing. So, and again, I guess that my point there is doing this properly can be such a driver of success for the business rather than just cuffing it and making it up on the run. In your experience, how do you see yourself making the biggest difference for amateurs like me who are running it themselves to bringing a professional like you into the business to actually gripping it up?
Yeah, I think you're bringing an understanding of what other businesses do. You know, one of the benefits of engaging with a professional, whether it's a legal professional, an accounting professional, or a marketing professional, you know, is bringing that subject matter expert into your business, right? For a supply chain, it's exactly the same thing, right? You know, that challenge that you spoke about in your early business is a challenge that many businesses have, you know, from a small business all the way up to large corporates. And a key thing around supply chain and supply chain professionals is being able to synchronize all of that, whether that's the operational piece or work toward or work with the supply and demand managers and planners and synchronize the supply and demand, right? So that the challenges that you face in your business are mitigated, known, and to some extent try and eliminate them as much as possible through proper planning, right? And one of the things that I love about being a supply chain professional and within sort of my field of endeavor is that I am fortunate enough to speak cross-functionally, right? So speak to the, you know, and work closely with CEOs and MDs, speak to the sales team, speak to the marketing teams, really understand what they're doing and what's happening in the marketplace, bringing that back into the business and working with demand and supply managers and really synchronizing that effect of, you know, when to bring product in, when not to bring product in, cannibalization of product, turning a product off when it's, you know, when the legislation changes and the product's no longer required.
Tell us a little bit about, you know, it sounds like a cool term, cannibalizing a product. I know from my military experience, cannibalization was something that was a last resort and you would just something that wasn't done. How have you seen what's your definition of cannibalization in this respect, and how does it work?
Yeah, I think
It's
you
just
know,
a cool word, cannibalization.
yeah,
You know?
yeah, I think products move quickly, you know, whether it's fashion or whether it's a tech product, it's got a quick life cycle. You know, once that product is, end of life, you know, you need to move it as quickly as possible, right? Before the next product. Otherwise, it's sitting on that shelf for ever and a day, or you're binning it. So, it's really understanding when that product's going to be, essentially cannibalized or end of life, really handling that through the supply chain, working with the sales and marketing team and going, right, we are, and the product management team go, hey, we're aware that this product's going to be, end of life. It's going, we need to make sure that, we are moving it through that supply chain before the next product comes in, right? Otherwise, it's going to have an impact on our new product, right? When you bring in a product into market, you want it to have the best possible success, and have the best possible value to the organization, right? And sometimes that's a really small window. If you look at fashion, you're launching a new, a new fashion garment, right? You want it to have the best possible success because it has only a very short life.
Like when it comes to fashion, mate, I'm sorted because I wear a white t-shirt and a black cap every day. So I'm sorted from the fashion front. Mate, one of the things I thought was interesting in your point there was really getting involved with the different elements of the business and you use that word synchronization. I guess the two most powerful words that I got out of my military experience was synchronization and orchestration.
Yeah.
Now, orchestration is bringing all the right pieces together at the right time, i.e. the orchestra. Synchronization is, can you make them play the right note at the right time?
Yeah.
And one of the things that's always a challenge in business is, sales promises, but can operations actually deliver? Sales will do whatever they have to do to get that, that deal across the line and meet their targets. And all of a sudden the poor operations team down in the warehouse, they're like, man, where is this coming from? We haven't got that, or I don't think we can do that. So really being able to understand, into the minutiae of the business, the relationships, the politics of it all is a really powerful thing to get it right.
Yeah, 100%. The supply chain is one of those functions that can really build some value for the organization, right? Whether it's, cost reduction activities around freight or just being really swift with purchasing, or, space utilization, right? One of the things that certainly I take to my clients is really this engagement, right? And engaging, cross-functionally, but as well as up and down through the hierarchy, right? So from the warehouse floor, all the way to the boards of directors, right? And, to your point, Pete, synchronizing and orchestrating those effects to get the best possible value for the organization. And sometimes, like us all, sometimes you get it right, sometimes you get it wrong, right? But the key point is, and even in many of the organizations that I've led supply chains is, really working closely with the sales team, understanding what they are going out into the marketplace with, and making sure that the ops team can back it up, right? So, can the ops team meet the promise that the sales and marketing teams are doing? And that, I think that's something that I really love doing. I got a passion for it. I love going into businesses and talking about, right, what do you want to achieve, right? Where are the potential opportunities that we can improve within the supply chain, and, really help lead that charge and gain value for, for a client or for that business.
I've got to ask, where have you seen this go disastrously wrong? Have you got any bad news stories that you can share of how getting it wrong in supply chain has, just has some lessons learned for others?
Yeah, I think overzealous sales approaches,
Yep.
where in particular, start of year or end of year budgeting, grand ideas to, hit a certain number, the supply chain team, supporting or working towards that support, working towards supporting that by bringing in the inventory, based on, that budget or the criteria, and then, the sales team can't get there for whatever reason, right? And it then becomes a big burden on cash flow, and that nothing against salespeople at all. We want salespeople to be positive and upbeat and, and go-getters. But I think the key point that I'm trying to make there is, we need to have a balanced approach, right? And then, and really scenario plan, right? So what's going to happen if we don't hit that sales number? What could we do with the inventory? Can we bring the inventory in later? What if we beat our budget? How can we, match the inventory to those sales above budget? And really, it's not to take to detract or make a salesperson's, job any harder, but as a business come together and somewhat put together, action plans, if you will, from, a military perspective and giving orders perspective, right? Actions on, if, actions on out of stock, actions on sales over budget, right? And putting those together and then coming together as a business and somewhat agreeing on and going, right, this is what's going to happen if this happens.
And I think you've really nailed there a real crossover between military mindset and business and what you do here. And that is all about planning. So what I've found is working with lots and lots of business owners, when they do their planning, they plan for beautiful things to happen. They plan for, hey, we're going to go out and start some marketing. We're going to run some ads, and then we're going to get all these leads, and then we're going to get all these sales, and we'll deliver all this stuff. Okay. So they go through that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 steps as if everything is just going to be rosy and, tiptoeing through the tulips kind of thing.
Yeah.
Whereas in reality, what we do in the military is we actually plan for everything that's going to go wrong. And as you said, actions on. An action on is when this event occurs, we've already got a plan or an action that we are going to take when that event occurs, which allows us to maneuver and act quickly so we don't get paralyzed and stunned.
Yeah.
So all of those points, I think that is something that, is critical in supply chain management, is preparing for what could go wrong.
Yep.
Do you see that being done well in industry, or is this standard practice?
No, certainly could be done better.
Yep.
We all like things to go well. And to your point, businesses within the private sector, are always planning for, yep, it's all good. Everything's going to align like we discussed. Right. But probably not enough scenario planning, not enough, what are the negatives that could happen? What happens if our major freight provider falls over, right? And some of the work that I've done for clients over the last couple of years is really put together, some business continuity plans, not only across the supply chain, but also, around other aspects of their business, right? And, then point them into the right direction with, partners that could help them, whether that's an IT issue or whatever the case is. But also, understanding your risks, what are your risks in supply chain? What happens if there's a vehicle rollover, not only from the human element and making sure, and that's a big part of, what we do in the military, making sure that our people are looked after, but right, what's, an accident happened, right? We're still, someone's been hurt, we're looking after them, but what's the next steps that we need to do, yeah. Right?
Have you got any good COVID war stories about supply chain issues? Like I must admit that I was a little bit of a prepper. I did have, probably a couple too many rolls of toilet paper hidden under the hidden under the stairs, and I did do a little bit of let's call it inventory management and warehousing during that time. But what was it like as a professional in this time with just the chaos? Were you working in global supply chains at the time or more of a domestic situation? Where were you during COVID and what was that experience like for you?
Working with clients. So from a own business perspective, tough. A lot of people, really, it wasn't an area that they, chose to spend in. From a supporting clients perspective, managing and helping them through a very difficult time, whether it was getting freight in, working through pathways of how they could, source other products, to, advising them, hey, if you've got capacity, and when I say capacity, financial capacity to buy more inventory, do so, right? And a couple of those businesses took those advice and they really shot off in terms of sales because they were within that segment or within their particular niche. They had inventory where their competitors didn't, and that was, a real benefit. And that was, maybe back to some earlier points that we made, that was a real key learning for me, right? So is, really focus on the customer and blending, inventory, finance, all of those things, and understanding which levers to move and what you're prepared to do. So, and that's something that, COVID certainly reinvigorated me and the importance of supply chain management, particularly in Australia. And also gave me a taste to see, can we support more local manufacturing?
Yeah, absolutely.
And the more that we can do, whether it's for small startups or medium-sized organizations that are already established, let's see what we can, what I can do as a supply chain professional to help those organizations.
It really does seem like you're part crystal ball gazer, part, lever puller, in terms of everything's predicted, everything's in the future. It's like, it's always, your best educated assessment of the situation and what you're going to do next. But at any time, all of those considerations, a spanner in the works could come in at any time. And then you've got to have your contingency, your redundancy and your resilience to say, well, what's next? How are we going to manage it?
That's Pete, exactly right. The old, prior preparation prevents piss poor performance.
Yeah.
So, planning in the supply chain is a real key thing, right? Yeah. And, whether you're planning for, all of those actions on and some of them eventuate or none of them eventuate, it is better to have the plan in the bag than not planned at all.
Yeah, amen. I think that's just one of those, it's one of the most important things that we talk about on the military mindset for business is really planning for what could go wrong, not for what's going to go right, because that's going to allow you to get a step ahead, to create that advantage over your competitors, because you're going to be able to enact that plan or not just go back and have to reset and do all your appreciations from the start again.
Yeah.
Mate, just as we get towards wrapping it up, I just want to run a bit of a scenario by you, right? So I'm one of these ideas guys that I'll come up with a new idea every day. And when I'm traveling overseas, for example, and, wandering the back streets of, Denpasar or the Philippines or somewhere like that, and I see some amazing products and I'm like, man, I could, start a Balinese furniture shop, down the road. What are some of the considerations that people really need to think about on starting an importing business and actually making it effective? Like, trade has been the backbone of people have been doing this stuff for thousands of years. Sail somewhere, put it on a boat, take it back and sell it. What if I wanted to start a new business importing something? What are some of the basic considerations I'd want to be thinking about in terms of my supply chain?
So import costs, right? So, really understand that product and what it means to bring into Australia. So if it's a timber product, it's going to be fumigated, and our borders need to be protected. So really understanding some of those fundamentals. Really turn to a professional and understand how much is going to cost to bring that product in, right?
Yep.
How, not only from a freight perspective, but you've got to store it, right? So how much is it going to store? Identification of the right partners, right? So all the 3PLs across the country do slightly different things and specialize in one thing or another. So selecting that right partner. Understand what sort of distribution model you're going to have. Are you going to have a centralized distribution model where it's all going to come to Sydney, for example, and then be distributed out the last mile from Sydney to the end customer? Or are you going to have a decentralized warehousing footprint where you're going to have half a dozen warehouses across the country? And each of those have a different cost variable, and each of those will also have a different customer focus or a level of customer satisfaction that you could bring to your customers, and really trying to blend what's the best for that product, the market, and the customer.
Mate, tell us a little bit about Vantage Point. And if I'm a business owner, tell me about the kind of business owner that you solve their problem for. So if I'm here with these problems, I should give Mark a buzz.
I think it's it's any organization that is struggling from a supply chain or operations perspective. So whether that's a 3PL that's struggling with their warehousing or their processes, to an importer or wholesale distribution business that does their own warehousing, that are struggling with supply chain leadership challenges, to even sort of small corporate or medium-sized corporate businesses that really need their leadership mentored, or doing things around sales and operations planning and or integrated business planning, and really looking to synchronize demand and supply, generate better connections with sales and marketing to get a better net value for their business.
Mate, I think my biggest takeaway from today has been synchronization and redundancy in planning. Is like, how do we actually make sure that the business is synchronized in all of the different units? We've got to have that golden thread of information that is consistent, that everybody has access to again, make sure that that customer experience is, they actually get what they want when they expect to get it. And the other part is going back, and it's just that same thread every time, is planning for redundancy, planning for what could go wrong rather than what can go right. Because when you need it, it's in your back pocket, you can pull it out and you can play the card as the situation arises. 100%. Mark, mate, look, thanks for sharing a bit of time and helping me learn a bit more about supply chain. What's next for Mark and Vantage Point?
Going out there and helping more businesses benefit from having a really slick supply chain.
Yeah, brilliant, mate. Well, thanks for joining us for another episode of Military Mindset for Business podcast. Mark Skrzypiec from Vantage Point. You'll find him on LinkedIn. Throw us your domain, your email. What is it? Your website?
Yeah, vantagepointmanagement.com.au.
Good on you, Mark. Have a great day. Thanks very much.
You too. Cheers, Pete. Thank you.